All right. Yeah, this week on Microcollege, our guests are Gordon Jones and Jennifer Jensen, who are the founders of Mount Liberty College in Salt Lake City, Utah. Gordon received his master's in philosophy from in political science from George Washington University and his MA from Stanford University and his BA from Columbia University. He's taught at various universities as well as working at the nexus of public policy and politics in Washington, D.C. for many years. Jennifer received her Ph.D. in Constitutional Studies from George Wythe University, her MA in Political Economy from George Wythe University, and her BA from Brigham Young University. She's taught at different universities, as well as spent much of her life raising and educating her 5 children. So, Mount Liberty College is a new young institution, a microcollege in every definition there. Yeah, I'll read your description, and then we can take off, from your biographies. So Gordon and Jennifer founded Mount Liberty College to serve those seeking a true education, rather than the job training most regular colleges provide. The Mount Liberty College philosophy is that a solid grounding in the wisdom and literature of the ages will provide an antidote to the disconnections that characterize modern life. This kind of education will be critical if humanity is to withstand the onslaught of artificial intelligence and the accompanying dominance of STEM subjects. While incorporating most of the great books that usually comprise a liberal arts education, MLC reaches a bit more broadly to the history and literature of lesser-known cultures whose contributions to the great conversation are only now becoming known. MLC is licensed by the state of Utah to award undergraduate and graduate degrees, but it is not otherwise accredited. The trustees of MLC believe that accreditation would take away what makes MLC different and unique and would transform MLC into a copy of every other college. So a lot of interesting things to talk about there. And but before we get into that, here on the Microcollege podcast, we always start with people's life stories, their biographies. So I guess I'd like to ask you about when you were 18 years old. Where were you? What shaped you during that period? Yeah, what was your education like that, and how did that influence where you are now?
You have a preference to who goes first?
Gordon, why don't you take it away?
All right, I'll start. When I was 18, I was leaving Salt Lake City to move to New York City to enroll as a freshman at Columbia College, the men's undergraduate faculty at Columbia University. I knew virtually nothing about college. I was the first person in my family to go to college. My parents, my father didn't even finish high school. My mother had, I think, 1 semester of college education. So I knew nothing. And obviously, New York was a revelation to me, all those people. And the education was a revelation to me, too. It's not quite clear, even now, why I went to Columbia. The story I usually tell is that I read a magazine article somewhere that said that Columbia taught more languages than any other school in the United States. And since I was determined that I was going to learn every language in the world, I said I might as well go there and get started. So I did. I went there, and I was a French major initially, and then I changed to American history and finished my degree in American history. And I haven't learned all of the languages of the world, but I've learned several of them. And at least I know that there are more than I can manage in this lifetime. Also, over that period of time, after my first year at Columbia, I was called as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and sent to France. So I spent 2.5 years in France and Belgium before returning to Columbia and finishing my undergraduate degree there in 1967. While I was in France, it was kind of a momentous time. As a missionary, you're not particularly involved in the day-to-day affairs of what goes on in France, but it was a little hard not to not to notice that the Algerians had attempted to assassinate Charles de Gaulle while I was there. And we listened with some care and a little bit of maybe trepidation to broadcast accounts of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Taiwan Straits crisis, which took place during the time that I was there. So I returned and re-enrolled at Columbia. I was really quite a different person than I had been when I left. You can't spend 2.5 years living in Europe without having some significant effect. Oddly enough, or maybe I don't know, maybe it's odd, I don't know, it was my political views and views on social issues were fairly nebulous before I went to Columbia. But during that time, I sort of acquired an orientation, philosophical and political orientation that has stayed with me, not unchanged, but has stayed with me from then until now. I sort of moved into what I would think I call the kind of National Review conservative William F. Buckley. While I was in New York in '65, Buckley ran for mayor of New York. That was the first political campaign I ever had anything to do with. In '64, I was the first presidential campaign that I was ever actually very much aware of. I paid a little bit of attention in 1960, but not much. I accumulate these stories. I don't know whether they're of any interest to anybody, but New York had a campaign in 1960 to clean up the city. So you're supposed to pick up your trash, and then the ads would show a trash bin and say, "Cast your ballot here for a cleaner New York." So, and I remember editorial comment saying, considering the two candidates that we have here running for president, maybe we ought to just say, "Cast your ballot here." So.
Wow. Yeah, so there's some classic things there in that, I've been asking people this question for over a year now, kind of mostly a weekly basis. People are doing interesting things, creating organizations and colleges, and the story of going, of course, leaving home, going to a different city is a common one, but also travel. And I think LDS folks and other people who go on missionaries, have this built into their experience of being in another culture, and that being very formative, and people do that informally as well. Gap year programs abroad, things like that.
Yes.
So that's striking that's part of your story as well, transformative experience. Yeah. Columbia University, the Columbia College, when you were there, is that Columbia had for a long time at least a really developed kind of a core curriculum. It was sort of a great books curriculum.
Yes, it was advertised, and it was one of the things that was attractive to me. I had no idea what it meant, but the idea of liberal arts, I always liked drama, theater. So reading the Greek tragedies, reading Socrates, although when I first got there, I thought you pronounced that Socrates. I truly knew nothing. So yeah, Columbia had the great books, and of all of the major colleges, I think Columbia even today has more of it left than just about anybody of the major universities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that program has had a big influence, I think, on other institutions, and then that kind of mode of liberal arts education that I see you're participating in. So,
and I still, when I teach my course at Mount Liberty, I go back to the textbooks. They aren't textbooks, but the books that I bought, my Aristotle and my Socrates and my Plato and Euripides. I still have those on my shelf from when I was a freshman in 1960. So, yeah. And a major impact on my life.
Yeah. Stood the test of time. It's a good thing about those classics, right? Yeah. So Jennifer, How about you? Where were you in this phase of life, and what made an impact on your becoming an adult?
So when I graduated from high school, it was a little bit later than that, but it was during the 80s. So right after college or right after high school, I went with an orchestra and we toured some of Europe, which was really fun. So I had a little bit of that experience, not 2.5 years, but just a little bit. But during my college days is when Chernobyl happened, when the Berlin Wall fell, that Day After movie that came out about, the bombs and stuff like that was a big deal when I was getting ready to go to college and first in college. And so that's the kind of thing that was happening in the world when I went to college. So it was kind of a scary time, or it felt very scary because you didn't know what was going to happen. And I just went to a regular college here in Utah and ended up getting married in a couple of years and finished school married. So I didn't have quite the interesting experience that Gordon did, but different times and all of that. I really love the classics, but I didn't even realize that that was a type of study. Like if you had said to me, oh, you could go get a liberal arts education, I don't think I would have even known that that existed. So those were my favorite types of books to read. And I read a lot of them, but I didn't have any idea that that was something that could be an actual education. So that was kind of eye-opening to me later when I found that out. So I just was at a normal college doing normal job training kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so how is it that you come to be doing what you're doing now, right? How do you go from, you've raised a family and you're raising a family now?
Well, when my kids were little, I actually homeschooled them, and I was trying to find ways to do that. And I found that's when I first was introduced to Wythe University. And they actually had this classical type education, and I was really drawn to it. And I love that. And that's how I raised my children, is how I taught and educated them was through a liberal arts education model. And then while I was raising them is when I got my master's and my PhD. And so it was kind of simultaneous with my kids going to school. And so then when my kids grew up a little bit, then I started kind of teaching for them and doing other stuff like that. So that's kind of how it went with me.
Yeah, so that's you kind of went through the classics with your kids as they were going through their own
Yes.
education.
Yes, exactly. We would have reading times every day, and where we would read chapter books. And some of them obviously I'd read before because I really like those kind of books, but a lot of them I read with them for the very first time. So it was actually really fun, and it was probably one of the best parts of our school day was reading those great classics and talking about them.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk to you today, because this this idea of microcollege, in general, like innovation, renewal of higher education is a movement we're following in several different directions, and it looks different in different places, and but I think there are some real commonalities in what people are bringing. One thing that we're tracking and is we've been talking about with other guests on the podcast is this just the term and the concept of the liberal arts, right? And Mount Liberty College is really foregrounding the phrase the classical liberal arts and focusing in on that and interpreting it feels like in some unique ways. But maybe when you use that term liberal arts, and especially classical liberal arts, what does that mean, and why is it important?
You go ahead, Gordon.
Well, all I was going to say is that to us, I think it means original sources. We don't have textbooks in our classes. If we want to look at the culture of Japan or China, We don't read books about Japan or China, although we might recommend some examination of an overview of history, but we would not assign a textbook on Japan or China. We would go to original sources, and some of these are very old. This is where you mentioned that our concept of the great books is a little broader than the traditional understanding. When that phrase, that description of it for education came into existence, the criticism that was made of liberal education was just a lot of dead white males, mostly European, was an accurate criticism, I think. We simply didn't have at those times access to the documents that we have now. When I graduated from Columbia, I had read the Quran. I had read a little bit of the Analects of Confucius, but that was essentially it, other than European culture. My course now that I teach, the development of civilization, we spend a lot of time reading Mencius, reading creation myths from various countries, areas of the world. We'll spend quite a bit of time in my class reading Gilgamesh. We don't read it in the original. Nobody reads it in the original, but yeah, we will read the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita, the prayer mat of flesh from China, these works of non-European literature are part of civilization, and so we expose our students to that. So that's what the liberal arts means to us, is engaging with the people who built the civilization that we lived in, and interacting with them in the great conversation. We teach our students that they're just like the students were 3,000 years ago. So their insights are valuable. They will be life-changing as they read these documents. They will come to appreciate things that they weren't even aware of before: truth, beauty, all of that. This is what a classical liberal arts education is to us. We do have a specific language component in our course of study as well. Every student has to have another language, but we don't. The only one that we teach is Latin, but many of them will acquire it in some other way, either growing up or on many of our students are LDS and have served missions in foreign countries, so they will pick up a language there, or they can just study on their own, test out of it. But amongst the faculty as a whole, we have a pretty broad coverage of world languages. So that's helpful and useful. But that's what liberal arts means to us. Getting right down into it, rolling up your sleeves, seeing what did Augustine actually have to say.
Yeah.
And that really makes a big difference too, because you're not getting that middle person in a textbook that always puts a slant on it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Whenever you write about somebody else, you're going to add your slant. It's just human nature. And so we're getting their original thoughts versus somebody's idea of their original thoughts. And I guess as originally you can get as in a translation. And that's another thing that we actually tend to do, especially in Gordon's class, where say they'll read the Odyssey, they'll read 5 or 10 different translations and then talk about all those differences. So we feel like all of that is really eye-opening for young students. One thing too is these people that lived, hundreds or even thousands of years ago went through some of the same situations we do. So one example is Marcus Aurelius. When he was king, there was a pandemic. And so it's interesting to see how he dealt with those kind of things versus how we dealt with them, and then be able to apply things that he did to our day to day. So, I mean, because human nature always has stayed the same and it always will. And the fact that they lived through some of the same kind of things that we're living through today is really eye-opening, I think, for students. And you know, it's a great way to see what other people have already tried, and we don't have to try things that don't work, maybe, you know, through the same experiences. So
yeah, and this, you know, writing is this remarkable technology. It allows us to hear in the voice of people who've been dead for hundreds or thousands of years, right? And it's remarkable.
yes,
Often that's a familiar voice, right?
yes, yeah. We read all of the works that Plato, in one of our classes for freshmen, we read the ones that Plato wrote about Socrates, about his life and death. And most kids have heard about Socrates. You know, most people have heard about Socrates. Very few have actually read anything about him, like actually read Plato where he talks about him. And so they love that, to actually sit down and read what was actually said about him versus just what they've heard. And sometimes that's different.
Right. Yeah, such a distinctive voice. The Socrates of the Platonic dialogues is you know, you recognize that
Yes.
voice anywhere.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's different from sometimes what they've heard or maybe read in a textbook or something. You know, just reading a paragraph or two in a textbook is very different from digging in and reading an entire dialogue or 3 or 4 dialogues, you know, about him.
Yep. Yeah. So I just want to underline one of the things that, you know, that you're saying here. I mean, so people may have heard of the you know, the great books curriculum at places like St. John's College. You know, there's a few other, you know, great books colleges that have a really strong, you know, a canon, a very set kind of a curriculum set of books from the Western tradition. And so, and those are really framed in such a way as to be kind of, you know, chronologically continuous from you know, from the Bible often, or the Odyssey or the Iliad, you know, down to some more recent times, but, you know, within Western culture. So what you're doing by bringing in, you know, Asian classics, you know, at the also Gilgamesh and some of these writers are not, you know, often stories are not in those canons. I mean, that's pretty different and distinctive. And I guess, you know, one of the arguments for the kind of St. John's, or the, you know, the coming out of the University of Chicago, you know, the great conversation is that it is a conversation within one culture, right? You know, the Greeks, you know, earlier Greeks speaking to the later Greeks, the Romans, and then, you know, the Judeo-Christian civilization and medieval civilizations. That's one continuous kind of dialogue. How do you think about, you know, how does it work to bring in these other civilizations into it?
I think it really opens their eyes as to that there are other things out there. I teach a political philosophy class that I taught last year to the juniors and seniors, and so we were reading philosophers about politics, you know, within the Western, but also people like Mencius and Confucius and what they had to say about it, so that they could see that it isn't all just right here, that some of those ideas span, you know, human nature from many cultures. And then there are other ideas brought in too that you don't always get in the Western canon.
We
So,
at the beginning of my course, I tell the students that they're going to be spending the next 2 years with me studying the development of civilization, and 4 years at the college. And I say, well, what you will find is that there are certain themes that pervade all cultures at all times. Questions of justice, questions of political accountability, legitimacy, family structures, social structures, caste and race. So right from the beginning, I have them looking in the literature as we read it, looking for clues to how that society dealt with some of those issues. And then if we move from the broad Middle Eastern culture down to specifically Greece, with the golden age of Greece, Pericles, and so on. Plato and the playwrights. We're reading these plays. What do you see now in terms of political legitimacy? Here's Antigone, defying authority. What does that? What echoes of that do you see today? And they will find them. And then we move from Greece to Rome, and again you had the questions of political legitimacy, the rule of law. When you post the 12 tables, everybody now knows what's legal and what's illegal. So we for the first time we have a legal standard against which we can measure behavior and the treatment of behavior. And then we'll move that on later until we get all the way up to the modern day, always tracing these particular things. And I tailor their writing assignments to reflect that as they move through this. Pick a topic and look at it. You pick a different topic and look for it for these next 4 years.
Yeah, so trace a similar theme over time. That's a really powerful thing I've done with classes as well. Yeah, beautiful. Well, so maybe can you tell us the story of Mount Liberty College? How did it come about that you decided to start this? And yeah, tell us a little bit about what it looks like today.
Jennifer, you go ahead.
Well, so we both taught at George Wythe, which was a liberal arts school here, and they had some problems in the beginning and they were not able to overcome those, and they ended up having to close. And we felt like that was a huge loss for this area. I mean, there's nothing liberal arts-ish anywhere near, really. I mean, there are some schools who say they are, but they're really not. And we just felt like there needed to be something. We were hoping that somebody else would do it, and we sat around and waited for a couple of years and nothing ever happened. And so eventually we decided that we would do that. And so, I mean, part of it was watching my kids go to college and see some of the stuff that they were learning and not being really impressed with it. And so we decided, well, let's go for it. And I think, I don't think Gordon really believed it would ever happen at first. And then as we started going, it really did start to happen. And we got students for the first year, and it was really impressive. Like, we were really impressed that it actually worked and that somebody wanted to actually come and do something different, because that's scary. It takes a lot of courage to, especially at that age, 18, a year is a long time. Mm-hmm. And to be willing to try a year, at some new place that doesn't have a history takes a lot of courage. And we were able to find some students with that courage and that wanted something different. And it was kind of fun because they were able to help too. Like, when you have small classes, only 8 or 10 people in a class, you can really tailor the class to fit what the students want even. And so that was really fun. And we got a lot of feedback, and we found other people who would eventually be part of our faculty who also loved the great books and the liberal arts. And so we were able to pull them in too. And it's just been, it's not grown the way we had kind of hoped. Like, we hoped it would be a little bit bigger, but we're around 20, 25 students. And so, which has actually been, really great. It's probably better that it went slowly so that we could get it ready, but it's been a really big growing experience, I think, for all of us to figure out what should be taught and what do people need to know to make their life better, and to be able to recognize things like beauty and understand human nature, and to understand some of those themes that Gordon was talking about. What would help them be able to be critical thinkers and be able to look at the world rather than just kind of accepting everything, but be able to look at it and say, that's something I want to accept, or that's something I don't, and be able to do that, have some personal autonomy in that and be able to make choices rather than just accepting everything they hear. Because we all know that not everything you hear in the media is true. So it's really been fun actually to go through and see all of that. So Gordon, you add stuff now.
Well, the only thing I would add is that Jennifer's right. I wasn't sure it was going to work. I'm glad we tried it, and I'm glad that it has in fact worked. And that's the point I'd like to emphasize, that it has worked. We have actually graduated students who've done a full 4 years of education with us, and lo and behold, they are now pursuing postgraduate studies at prestigious universities and doing what they want to do. So the model that we set up at the beginning, which was consciously independent, we did not seek accreditation and have no intention of ever seeking accreditation. None of our students can borrow money from the federal government to come here. Tuition is low, and they're not going to be burdened with a debt because they can't borrow money to finance their education. So that part of it, I think, has proven to be a validation of the model that we started out with. And you keep talking about a microcollege. We never said to ourselves, let's found a microcollege. We said, let's found a liberal arts college that will start out with 20 freshmen, and then 20 more and 20 more and 20 more, and eventually we'll have a school of around 100 students. And that was our goal. We're not there yet, but we got about halfway there. That first year we enrolled about, I think we enrolled 11 students the first year. Our goal was 20. One of them had some health problems and dropped out, but that's sort of what the pattern has been. We're somewhere between 5 and 10 new students each year for 4 years, now entering our 5th year of operation, which with, as I say, a track record of graduates who have gone on to the master's programs at other universities. One of them is home writing the great American novel. He decided not to go on, but he could have gone on if he'd wanted to. The lack of accreditation has never been a problem. We have explored this extensively, and most graduate faculties don't care. You want to know that you've got a degree, and we do have a legal degree. The state of Utah licenses us to award degrees, so we do that. But Ralston College doesn't say, well, we're not going to admit you because you graduated from an unaccredited institution. In fact, 2 of our students are right now in Greece with Ralston's Masters of Humanities program.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a remarkable part of your story, and certainly very interesting. You know, it's a common question that I receive about our programs, and I think that the whole system of accreditation is very difficult to understand and complicated for people. So maybe you describe, as you looked into this, like what, why not get accredited? Like what would that compromise in your programs to go through a formal accreditation process, such that you decided to forego it?
Well, a lot of parents are realizing today that there are problems in the K-12 schools, right? The Department of Education has kind of taken over, and there are a lot of parents who are choosing alternative methods. So not just homeschool, but charter schools and private schools, and they're seeing that there's a problem there and understanding that it kind of comes back to the Department of Education and the money that they get from the federal government and having to follow mandates. And what they don't understand is that the accreditation for colleges goes back to that same source. So any accreditation company that you find today, or 95% of them, any that are considered legitimate accreditation companies, all themselves are accredited through the Department of Education. So you're going to have the same problem in the college atmosphere that you have in the K-12. The same problems exist in both. And once you become accredited, there are strings that are attached. You have to do certain things. there's some oversight that they get to choose. I've heard stories of colleges who planned different classes and somebody on the faculty decided they didn't like it and called the accreditation company, and the accreditation company came and said, you can't teach that class, or, you know, we're not going to accredit you. And so there's all these kind of things that parents, I just don't think parents realize. They think of accreditation more like you're licensed, you know, you're a legitimate company that I know that if I give you money, you're not just going to fly with it and I'll never see you again. That's really not what accreditation is. Not anymore. I think that probably was at the beginning, but it isn't anymore.
There are
And so
really
now you have to
only
keep these
two
rules.
There are really only two advantages to accreditation as we see it. One is if you don't finish at Mount Liberty, can you transfer Mount Liberty credits to somewhere else? And the answer to that question is probably not. With a few
Maybe a
exceptions,
few places.
we
Yeah.
might be able to make a few exceptions, but largely that's not going to be possible. So if you start with us, you should
You
plan
need
to
to
finish with us. The second advantage is that you can qualify for federal aid, grants, and loans. We don't want federal aid for our students, so that's no advantage. So there really is no upside to accreditation as far as we can see it. And as Jennifer says, there is the potential for significant downside as we see the accrediting institutions requiring just the time and the money it takes to be accredited. There are schools that have, you know, whole departments of accreditation overseeing them to make sure they don't stray from the party line and endanger that accreditation. Our experience is that the graduate schools don't care.
I mean, there are some that probably do, but for the majority, you know, they usually require some kind of a test, the GRE or the LSAT for law schools.
Yeah.
If you go to a law school and you have a good score on that LSAT, they're not going to care. They just want the good score on the LSAT. So most places just don't care that much. And we've actually found, even at least schools around us, so regular colleges around us, we'll hear stories like my son had a really good friend who transferred from one to the other, and one was a 2-year, and he got his associates there and thought he should be able to transfer it to this other school, which they're both accredited. It should have worked. And they have his 68 credits, they took 8. And I think part of that is because, you know, people are not going to college as much. Like there's a downturn, and so they don't want just 2 years of your money, they want 4 years. You know, they want you to be there all 4 years. So I think even the transferring credits isn't as big of a deal for needing accreditation as it used to be. So there's lots of reasons. I mean, we get to choose ourselves, and our students help choose what our curriculum looks like. And I had mentioned to you before, we had one class that was development of civilizations just for the United States, American history. And the professor was going to have them read a certain classic, and most of the students had already read it before. And so they just kind of voted amongst themselves, we don't really want to read that book we already have, let's read a different one, because there's so many, right? You can only read so much in your lifetime, so why read the same one again? Not that that's bad, but they all wanted to read something different, so they talked the teacher into reading something different, which is great. I was really excited to hear that. And it's a really fun thing to be able to do in a small school, is to have some of that control and say, we as students want to do X, and be able to actually do it.
You may recognize this as a return to the medieval model of the first universities. That's what it is. We regard ourselves as a community of scholars. Some of us have been at it a little bit longer than others, but the students have their views and attitudes, and their ability to assess and process information are just as good as ours. We've been at it longer. We can point them to things that they might not otherwise know about, but it's not really the case that our thinking is superior to theirs. So we regard the school as a community of scholars and invite them to join us in the enterprise of shaping this community so that it is most responsive to the needs and desires of the community.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think that you know, that the medieval roots of the university are something that are fascinating to learn about. And as you said, you know, the university begins as an organization of students, right? As a union, you could say, and not as a wing of the government or of the church or, you know, or of some sort of corporation. It was the students banding together to negotiate with the teachers who were the college, right? They're the faculties, right? There were kind of two entities that were in conversation or in negotiation with each other, kind of organically. That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, so I think, Jennifer, your story about that class, it points to the fact that, I mean, you are a homeschooling family, and it sounds like, you know, a fair number of your students are coming from a homeschooling background, and this is
a lot of them, or alternate education, a lot of them from charter schools and stuff too. Yeah.
This homeschooling movement is a major force in education that has grown, you know, a lot over the last several decades, and since COVID, you know, a lot more people also have stepped into that. And so I'm wondering about, you know, your experience of having, you know, designing a college that really has that population. People have had that experience of you know, outside of the walls of a school, you know, homeschooling background. What is that like, and what does that bring to a classroom setting, or you know, they're in school, right, all of a sudden?
Actually, for the most part, they do really well. Because we're liberal arts, usually families who are already kind of in that direction are the ones that come. We've found some kids who have read amazing amounts of books and really have an amazing background that you know, we can have really great conversations with, because they have some of that already. Not everybody comes that way. It really is just your desire. You know, you don't have to have already read a ton to be able to come here, but if you have a desire to learn and a desire to understand, then I think that is what matters. But yeah, we are somewhat, or we kind of see ourselves somewhat as, if you as a parent thought that the schools weren't good for K-12, then potentially you should see the colleges the same way, and you should want something different even up through college. And so that's kind of a little bit of what we teach and what we talk with parents about, is that it's not any better when you get into college. And so it's good to keep that going, because kids can really go, the older they get, the deeper that they can go, right? I mean, even if they've read the same book in high school, they can read the same book in college, but get something completely different out of it. So, or even, you know, you have two students in the class, they can read the same book and get completely different things out of it, and have really great conversations. So our classes are all Socratic method. We have discussions, and we ask questions, and we try to find principles, and we try to figure out together what the author's trying to say, and what we should be getting from that author. And so that's really different from lectures too. We're not trying to fill their, what's the word that they always use, like fill their bucket. We're trying to light a fire under them to want to keep learning. And so it's a really big difference there. We're just not trying to fill, you know, pour things into them, because that's not how education really works, right? We all know that. But if we can light a fire and get them excited about it, and they're reading these super amazing things, and wow, I actually just read about Socrates, and how cool is that? You know, and that it's really fun to watch. You know, at the end of the school year, their first year, sometimes in a class, I'll say, okay, well, think about this whole year. What have you learned this whole year? What have you read this whole year? And they're just so excited to be able to look at that list. And obviously by the end of the year, they're pretty exhausted and their brains are pretty fried, you know, but they're also really excited, or to be able to come to class and say, yeah, I was just listening to the news and it mentioned this person and I read him. That is so cool to be able to say, I read this guy that I just heard about in the news, you know, or whatever. It was just, it's really fun to watch. So
Yeah.
that's a really cool thing. And I think homeschool families are kind of already on that track. So back to the original question, homeschool families are kind of already on that track. So it's more of a natural flow, I guess. But we don't necessarily, we're not limited to that. We'll take students who just desire for something more, even if they came from regular. In fact, what's really funny is we just got an application for a student a little bit ago who is from a public school. And one of our questions on our application is, what classics have you read, and say a little bit about them? And her answer was literally none. She has not read any classics or any, you know, original source work really. And so that's going to be really interesting, but she wants it now. She has this desire. And so she's coming from a different place maybe than those homeschooled kids, but it, you know, she can totally do it just like anybody else. So
we should emphasize that Mount Liberty is, we haven't had a major problem of selection from a huge pool of applicants, but Mount Liberty is it's not an easy school. We're engaging in different cultures, authors who wrote 3,000 years ago, and an idiom that is quite different from the idiom that we deal with today. We don't provide training, we provide education. As a very Socratic idea. We want to extract from the students, bring out what the students already know, as Socrates did. If you want to be an aerospace engineer, this is probably not the school you want to go to. Any engineering master's degree program is not going to accept a degree from Mount Liberty College, because we teach the philosophy of science and the philosophy of math, but we don't teach math and science themselves. So if you want that kind of a degree, we would recommend, very few students would do this, we would say, come and study with us for 2 years or 4 years, and then go get an undergraduate engineering degree someplace, and then go on to your master's degree. It's going to take you 2 to 4 years longer than it otherwise would, but you will now have a grounding in culture that will stand you in good stead for the rest of your life, and you will be the best engineer at Lockheed Martin because you've had this 4 years with us. Yeah, you got there late, but who runs Lockheed Martin? It's not engineers, it's liberal arts graduates.
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, here, you know, liberal arts is it's had a bad rap in various ways in the last, you know, several decades, or, you know, decade or so, and you know, from different directions. People from the left, as you mentioned, you know, people from the right. I think maybe the word liberal in there is challenging to some people, but overall, this also is a question. It's not useful, right? And I think that clearly isn't true if you look at, you know, who actually is, as you're saying, in positions of leadership, and, you know, what is kind of elite education look like for leadership in general. It is going back to ancient times, a liberal arts education, right?
yes. Well, and we think that's only going to get greater in the next little while as AI starts to take over jobs. Everybody's worried about that and talking about, you know, we have no idea what jobs are going to still be around, and, you know, what do we do? And yet people are pushing kids into STEM jobs as fast as they can. And yet, if you think about it, those are the jobs that are going to disappear first. Those are the ones that AI can do the best. And so if you have this really broad liberal arts education, then you're left with more of a chance to do something different. You know, if your job is taken over, you still have this really broad education that you can fall back on and find something else. But if all you are is trained in this one little tiny area and that job disappears, you have nothing. You basically have to start over. And so we feel like a liberal arts education, this broad education, is actually going to be more valuable in the future than people think it is now. You know, just for that very reason of we don't know what's happening, we don't know what's coming, and let's be prepared in all different ways so that we can, you know, move easier from place to place and field to field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that resonates with me for sure. And I think, you know, the Great Books seminar, right, the discussion-based classes, the Socratic method that you're talking about is, I think, for me also a reason for small scale institutions. You know, I think, you know, 100 students, as you're kind of shooting for, would still, I think, qualify as a microcollege in a lot of ways.
Well,
right?
and they wouldn't be all in the same class. I mean, our
Right.
classes are usually 8 to 10 people. And we would never be over 20. That's always been our rule, is we would never have over 20 in a class. And I think, yeah, you can't really have a good discussion if you have more than that. You just can't. So we want to keep it small so that everybody feels a part. Because really, if you think about it, when you're in a group, you remember what you say better than you remember anything else. And so it's really important that everybody participate and be a part of that discussion, because that's really where the learning comes, much more than just listening.
There's a really case of appropriate scale, right? And that, you know, I also have really valued and come to appreciate that the you know, the approach that is brought to these primary source texts, that these are voices of people, you know, from the past, from different places in the world, from very different kind of perspectives and backgrounds. But you know, the attitude that is cultivated in a Great Books classroom is one of like, what is this voice, what is this person saying, right? What is their, you know, how do they see the world, and can we understand that from sympathetically first before we start to kind of poke holes into it, and that's like a really great skill for life, it seems to me.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, you know, on the other side, I mean,
Yeah.
one question I have about a Great Books kind of focused curriculum is, you know, what forms of knowledge are not represented by something that's in a printed text, right? And that might be, you know, what about oral traditions, but also what about embodied experiences? Here at Thoreau College, we do a lot of farm work and a lot of you know, things, you know, camping and immersions in nature, right? Is there something, you know, what else is I guess is included in a Mount Liberty, you know, curriculum?
Well, we don't offer courses in gardening or anything like that, but we do have students, oddly enough, who are gardeners and who, as part of their education, will study business management principles and interpersonal relations and apply them to their family business, their family farm, or their family gardening business, and are very successful with that. We've had a number of those. I obviously, when you're dealing with oral tradition, we've got to get to the point where the oral tradition can start to be written down. And when we get to that point in my course in Development of Civilization, we look at those cultures as well. So we've got students reading a griot's rendition of the legends surrounding Sundiata, and you know, in Africa, Susa. We do the same thing with the traditions in China, Korea, Japan, Australia. It's not
South America.
Yeah, South America. The Popol Vuh is part of my curriculum. You know, so we as these orally performed I don't, you can't call them documents because they were orally performed, but when they start to get written down, then we start to deal with them and the cultures that produce them. Well, you know, then write down the Iliad and the Odyssey at the beginning.
Right.
Once you write them down, then we can start to deal with them. We can't go back and hear somebody in Sundiata's court talking about him, but we can go back and sample the history and the tradition of the African griot who sang those songs. And I'll give them two different ones and say, compare these two. Why are they different? And they're all dealing with the same thing. Why do these two griots deal differently with these issues? So it's revelatory. It's revelatory to them. They've probably never heard of Sundiata as I had when I was an undergraduate. That's what I mean. We have not only broadened geographically, but we've also gone back into our own culture and brought out neglected voices that exist there. And this is true, it's most obvious in the United States with the Black culture, but it's true as well in Italy. The Sicilian culture in Italy, different, very, very different from northern Italy. France has its own linguistic and ethnic entities that maintain their identity and their cohesiveness even down to the present day. You can still find people in Nice who will say, "Oh, I'm going to France tomorrow."
Right.
Yeah, we also do practica or like internships. So we have one student who loves gardening, and she actually did an internship with a local community garden in her area. And she was, I think, 16, maybe 17 when she was an early student. She came in when she was still high school age, and she actually the next summer became the manager of the garden at only something like 17 or 18. She was good enough and was able to talk to people and speak and feel comfortable and confident in what she was doing, that she was asked to be the manager the next summer. And she told us she made a lot more money than most kids her age by far because of that. So so we don't necessarily provide those things for them like you do, but we don't push them away either. We think they're all very valuable, and whatever a student's interest is, they should totally be doing.
We don't offer it, but I think everybody ought to go out and have the experience of thinning a row of beets.
Yeah.
Sugar beets. Crawling 2 miles down a row of sugar beets and thinning them. It helps to know what that kind of a life is like, even if only to convince you that you don't want to have to do that the rest of your life.
Well, I think it's striking to note. I mean, Socrates, and all those classic works, they're continually making reference to practical trades, carpentry, sportsmanship, shipbuilding, all of those sorts of things that's where our language comes from. So that certainly is valuable. I think part of what we're doing here, I think. So. For sure. We do think it's really important. I mean, that's why we do require practica, where we'll have students do all different kinds of things. One girl went and got a real estate license, and that way she had a way to earn some money, but still could get this really great education too. So cool. Well, I really want to thank both of you so much for your time today, for sharing what you're doing there. And yeah, Gordon, I'd really love to get your reading lists, actually. They sound fascinating.
I can send it to you. Yeah. It changes all the time.
Right. Yeah.
As we find out more things, always. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.